Hey everyone, it's Sevy. Along with Shenhe, Yunjin is the latest support to be added in Genshin and with quite a unique kit that revolves around buffing your team's normal attacks. Recently, we've been getting supports that have a very specific playstyle and function, such as Goro for Geo and Shenhe for Cryo. But for Yunjin, instead of being specific to an element, she's instead specific to normal attacks for any element. So she's in an intriguing place of being niche yet flexible at the same time. With that, I've grown to love Yunjin and the possibilities she opens up. After spending a lot of time enjoying and testing her out, I'm here to present to you my complete guide on Liyue's favorite thespian and opera singer. We'll be discussing how her kit works, the math behind her damage buff, her constellations, stat builds, artifact sets, weapons, and team comps. If you want to build even more fantasy characters, then check out this video's sponsor, the mobile game Raid Shadow Legends. Here you get to summon champions with various types and power levels. As of now, they have over 500 champions available, all of which you can build with artifacts and fight bosses and other players with. I really appreciate that beginners get tons of rewards from the start with lots of energy to get drops from campaigns and bosses. Also, summoning shards get dropped a lot throughout battles, so I get to summon even over 10 times a day without spending. But among the exciting bosses that Raid already lets you beat up is the 6-headed Hydra, each head of which is its own boss battle that brings special challenges. Some of the most interesting ones are from the Head of Suffering and Head of Blight. One makes you take a share of the damage it gets, and the other will poison your entire team, so watch out. Anyway, aside from this month's Hydra boss, Raid is also bringing a free new champion called Alex the Sharpshooter, who is actually modeled from Simple, the esports legend and Navi star. Just log in for 7 days before January 28 and you get him completely free. There's seriously never been a better time to get started, and if you use my link in the description or scan my QR code, you'll get a free starter pack worth almost $30 to kickstart your game. We're talking a free champion, Rector Drath, 200,000 silver, 1 energy refill, and 1 XP boost, and 1 ancient shard so you can summon awesome champions as soon as you get in game. You'll find it sent to you in this mailbox. Thank you, Raid, for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back into it. When it comes to Yunjin's kit, let's start with the most important part. Her burst. When she activates it, she deals 1 instance of AoE geo damage and gives your entire team the Flying Flag formation buff, which adds normal attack base damage based on a percentage of Yunjin's defense stat. If you're not familiar, let me first explain the math behind how that works and why it gives so much value on certain characters. When you check out your normal attack in the talent page, you'll see these percentages. This is multiplied to your character's current attack stat to get the base damage. So for example, if Chi-Chi's attack stat is 2060 and the multiplier of her 1-hit normal attack is 64% on talent level 8, then multiply them and the base damage is 1318. This would then go through other damage multipliers like physical damage bonus. Then on top of that would be crit damage, and then factor in enemy resistances and you get the final damage output. So where does Yunjin's buff come in? Again, it's based on a percentage of her defense. So say my Yunjin's defense is 2587 and her burst's defense scaling is 61% plus another 11.5% from her passive. So 72.5% of 2,587 is 1,875. And then it's that flat value that gets added as part of the total normal attack base damage. Without Yunjin, we see here 2,456 as Chi-Chi's first crit hit. With Yunjin, that climbs to 6,495 on crit, which is more than double of Chi-Chi's initial damage. And the math checks out with an acceptable margin of error. Here's why Yunjin shines on some characters. If the initial base damage value without her was low in the first place, which could either be because the character has a low attack stat, a low damage multiplier, or both, then adding her flat damage buff supercharges that. However, as the base damage goes higher, then the value it adds diminishes in comparison. Not to say that it's not valuable, it's just that it's less pronounced than the previous scenario. So for characters like Chi-Chi, Fischl, or Zhongli, and so on, with relatively low attack damage multipliers, you'll see an exaggerated result more. But for characters like Yoimiya or Eula who have high attack stats and multipliers, then less so. But regardless, one thing's for sure, it's a hefty buff on your normal attacks that can surpass others like Kazuha or Bennett given certain conditions. However, that's the biggest limitation, that it's confined to normal attacks, whereas someone like Bennett or Kazuha can buff more sources of damage. This is what makes Yunjin a very niche party member. Other things about her burst: it lasts for 12 seconds with a cooldown of 15 seconds, which is is a good amount of time, and it costs 60. The 60 energy cost seems manageable at first, but if she's the only Geo on your team and you don't stack enough ER on her, that burst cost might hinder her too much from, well, doing what she's mainly there for in the first place. I'll talk more about her energy later. Then there's the trigger quota, a new mechanic introduced with Shenhe and Yunjin. This just means that you can only proc this buff a limited number of times within its duration. For Yunjin, her quota is 30, which is fairly a lot. Just be aware that if one attack hits multiple targets, for example, if Noelle's wide AoE attack hits 3 enemies at once, then that depletes 3 from the trigger quota. Characters with fast attack speeds or wide AoE damage are the best at maximizing this quota. Then she has the passive talent Breaking Conventions, which further adds onto the defense scaling of her burst buff depending on how many elements you have in your team, making her the first character to really incentivize a rainbow team. It's a minor bonus though, and for me, trying to hit the 4th level isn't as worth it as compared to getting the effects of something like Double Geo or Pyro Resonance. So unless your team is naturally a rainbow team, don't feel like you have to force it. And finally, note that her burst does not snapshot. Whatever her current defense is, and if it increases or decreases while the burst is still active, is what the damage buff is calculated from. The other part of Yunjin's kit is her shield skill. It protects you for a moment and deals damage when released. You can gain 3 different levels of her shield by tapping it, holding it for 1 second, and holding it for 2 seconds, with the damage going higher. Yunjin's Ascension passive then allows you to deal max damage with a perfect parry. Yunjin's skill damage isn't that big, so it's really meant for protection and generating geoparticles. Aside from charging up Yunjin herself, it's great for battery purposes on a Geo team and useful for giving your team and cooldowns a breather. For her talent priorities, you should focus completely on getting her burst level as high as you can, then level up her shield a bit. Stopping your skill talent level at level 6 is fine, so you can save your resources. There's no need to raise her auto attack talent. C0 Yunjin is great already, but let's see what her constellations add. C1 is just a cooldown reduction on her skill. The main benefit is that it's better protection by getting her shield up sooner if you need it, and it makes her battery a bit faster. C2 gives your buff a 15% normal attack damage bonus boost for all party members. From my testing, this is a significant enough boost that makes it her best early constellation. If you want a good early stopping point, it's this. C3 increases her burst level, meaning the defense buff scaling also goes up. It's a smaller increase compared to C2, but it still makes her better at what she's good at. C4 gives her a 20% defense increase if she triggers Crystallize. The 20% defense increase is something, but it isn't that big of a boost all things considered. And what makes this a bit tricky is that since she doesn't have damage over time, you just have to be conscious that either her skill or burst will proc Crystallize. C5 increases her skill talent level, which just means a slight damage bump on her skill. Finally, C6 adds an additional attack speed bonus to Yunjin's buff, which means that aside from hitting harder, you also hit faster, which results in more total damage output. It's a great constellation that, again, just makes her much better at the one thing she's supposed to do. When it comes to her artifact stats, it's pretty simple. The default is to go full on defense percent circlet, goblet, and sands on her. The sands can be switched between defense and ER though, depending on what you get for your substats, but defense is still the ideal option. For substats, the priorities are defense and energy recharge, but if you're running her with a Favonius Lance, which I'll talk about later, then you'll want to get a good amount of crit rate substats too, at least 30%. For her energy recharge, targeting about 180% is enough to ensure that her burst will be ready as often as possible. This can be lower if you're using her with another Geo to help battery her, but if she's the only Geo on the team, I'd recommend it to be 180 to 200%. Now for her artifacts. Let's check out some low AR artifacts first. The choices are pretty simple. There's 2-piece Defender's Will, which gives Yunjin a 30% defense increase. Then there's a 2-piece Exile or 2-piece Scholar for energy recharge, which are great for keeping up Yunjin's burst. You can also equip her with 4-piece Exile for some overall team quality of life and to make her a better universal battery. Coming into high AR artifacts, let's start with the 2-piece combos. There's the 2-piece Husk, 2-piece Defender's Will combo. Giving her that combo is easy to use because its full defense boost is unconditional. It's just that since Defender's Will is a 4-star set, you're limited to lower main stats or substats, which gives the 4-piece Husk a potentially higher stat ceiling. Alternatively, Alternatively, there's the 2-piece Husk and 2-piece Emblem, which is also easier to farm than the 4-piece sets and addresses both her defense buff scaling and energy recharge. For her best full sets, we have 3 main choices: 4-piece Husk, 4-piece Noblesse, and 4-piece Archaic Petra. I'll go through them one by one to see which could work best. First is 4-piece Husk. It can give a 54% defense bonus, though the Geo Damage addition is pretty minor. It's a solid option and you shouldn't have any problem keeping the stacks up since she's expected to almost always be off the field anyway. Then there's 4-piece Noblesse, which buffs your team's attack by 20%. If your goal is to buff your main DPS, then Noblesse and Husk are pretty evenly matched and will depend on your DPS's base attack and normal attack multipliers. The higher the base attack and normal attack multiplier, the more beneficial Noblesse will be to your DPS. But remember that Noblesse's buff is team-wide, so if you're using a team that also relies on off-field damage, Noblesse will be more beneficial overall. Also remember that you can only have one full Noblesse set holder on the team since multiple 4-piece Noblesse effects won't stack. Finally, there's the 4-piece Archaic Petra set. Archaic Petra complements Yunjin's buff the most and yields the highest damage addition, but only in certain cases. The way it works is that when Yunjin picks up a crystal shard of a specific element, then your teammates gain a 35% elemental damage bonus of that element. It has to be her picking it up though, otherwise it won't work if someone else does. It also synergizes well with her C4. However, you'll have to be more conscious of applying elements on enemies before using Yunjin's skill, and can be confusing if you have a multi-elemental team. Also, you can't buff geo damage, animo damage, or physical damage in this manner. So if you want a more consistent effect with a more convenient condition, then either the Noblesse or Husk set is better. As for her weapon choices, we want something that can either help with ER or increase her defense. Sadly, no single weapon can offer both, for now, at least. First up, the Favonius Lance, which is the best free-to-play option. It gives her energy recharge and lets her generate universal particles with crit hits. I like this the most since it makes her a better team battery. The only caveat is that you have to build more crit rate into her, and unlike ranged characters, you can't pinpoint weak spots to do a guaranteed crit hit. Still, it's workable. Something like 30 to 50% crit rate would be good enough in practical use. If her burst or skill doesn't crit, you'll just have to force it with her normal attacks. If you haven't managed to get a Favonius Lance, then the prototype Star Glitter from the crafting workshop with its high ER substat will be a good replacement, just without the particle generating effect. Then, if you're a Battle Pass haver, the Deathmatch is another option. It adds to her defense, but only if you have 2 or more enemies around. If you want maximum damage buff, this is currently the only polearm that adds defense. But personally, I find that at R1, the additional 16% defense isn't that huge, and this polearm might be better used on other DPS units. And you'll have to get much more ER rolls on her artifacts. Still, it's a viable choice. Finally, Yunjin doesn't need a 5-star weapon, and there are none that are an optimal fit for her that a 4-star can't do. But anyway, the Skyward Spine and Engulfing Lightning are your 5-star options because of the energy recharge they give. So who is she good to team up with? Ideally, any DPS that relies on normal attacks as a primary source of damage. It's a long list, and you would know based on your account which among your available built characters fall under that category. Take for example Yoimiya, Noelle, Razor, Fischl, Rosaria, and the list goes on. I've been mentioning names earlier in the video as well. And like I said, in my explanation of her burst mechanics, she gets more value if you use her to buff characters who have either generally lower attack stats or lower damage multipliers. But one great thing about Yunjin is that she can make characters who normally aren't built as normal attack DPSs become better DPS units. For example, you can put her with a physical DPS Zhongli, a physical DPS Qiqi, a main DPS Chongyun, and so on. She opens up team comps that, while they aren't technically meta teams, can be just as fun for players who are willing to experiment further, or who want to see their favorite character perform all their beautiful auto-attack animations. Lastly, I just want to add that 1, she works with Child when he's in his Hydro melee form, and even buffs the Riptides that are considered as normal attack damage. And 2, she doesn't work with Raiden's burst since it counts as burst damage and not normal attack damage. And that's it for my Yunjin guide. She presents really interesting possibilities for players willing to explore, and I'm guessing there will be more in the future with new characters in the mix. Even just at C0, she already offers quite the value. So what about you? How do you plan to use Yunjin? Let me know in the comments down below. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!